Hey guys, welcome back to Project Bodybuilding. I've been rolling out a ton of comparisons recently for my Road to the 2024 Mr. Olympia series. I've been having a ton of fun with that series and I will get back to it soon enough. For now, I have a burning question that I've always had the intention of answering but never got around to it. Nick Walker had to sit the 2023 Olympia out, we all know that by now, I'm not telling you anything new. And given how those update pics looked before the show, I legitimately think it could have won. Now, immediately following the 2023 Olympia, I did a comparison video where I took the top 3 from the 2023 Olympia and then added Nick Walker's 2022 Olympia version in to see where he might have placed. You can go and watch that video. I'm not going to spoil it, but what I will say is that Nick did extremely well. So I just had the thought of, well, Nick did the 2024 New York Pro after the 2023 Olympia. It's a more recent version, so maybe that's the version we would have gotten. Now, I'm not too convinced on that point. I think those update pics before the 2023 Olympia were insane, even better than when we got the 2024 New York Pro. But what if we did get that New York Pro version at the 2023 Olympia? Where would he have placed? That's the question. I've already done the comparison with all these guys and their recent versions, and I will continue to do matchups with Olympia qualified athletes and their recent versions as well. This isn't to answer a question about the future. There's nothing that we can learn from this video that we can apply to future predictions. It's simply just a question I have rolling around in my head, and I'm finally getting to it now, just in time for this year's Mr. Olympia in a few weeks. So let's not wait any longer. Let's compare the top 3 of the 2023 Mr. Olympia against Nick Walker's latest version from this year's New York Pro, and ask ourselves, where would Nick Walker have placed at the 2023 Mr. Olympia? If you guys like these types of comparison videos and want to see more, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. We're going to start with the front double, obviously, and this is going to be one of the harder poses to determine. They're all really good. Now, immediately, I have Hadi and Derek sitting above the other two because those two, Samson and Nick, have some pretty glaring flaws each. Now, Nick obviously has that weird structure, but honestly for Samson, I think his flaw may be just as apparent. That's his subpar conditioning. It really is just as distracting to me as Nick's structure is. You can look at Nick, Derek, and Hadi, and you can all see they are in top-notch condition with details in every body part. Samson is way too smooth from top to bottom, and he loses several body parts to Nick. Because Samson's legs are lacking in detail so much, I have Nick here because I can actually see what's going on. I also have Nick winning the lats just by themselves. His are wider proportionally, at least in this shot, and of course he wins the arms. The only thing he is not winning is the midsection. But in this shot with this pick, I see Samson as just kinda meh. I think he's done better vacuums. If this was the Arnold UK version where he had that extra polish, I think he really could have made up some ground here and won the pose. But I have him last here, to be honest. I know I'll get a little pushback, but this conditioning is just not good. Nick may not be pretty, but he is a freak, and his pose is getting the job done to some extent. At least he's not last. But Nick will have to stop here at third because, like I said, I see a divide in the competition. Derek and Hadi just aren't suffering from the flaws to the same extent as Nick and Samson are. So what about Hadi versus Derek? I could really have either of them. Derek has the better upper body, except when it comes to the arms, because Hadi is both bigger and harder, therefore he wins. But really, even in the rest of the upper body, Hadi isn't really far behind. Derek is really coasting here on his smaller waist. Now, Derek probably has the better quads when you just look at them by themselves, but because Derek is so wide up top, Hadi definitely has the better balance. And finally, Hadi is just much bigger overall. There's a noticeable jump in overall size from Derek to Hadi, and that's what sealed the deal for Hadi. He is just bigger than Derek. He has the better arms and the better balance. Derek does have better shape, but to me, Hadi has pretty okay shape. I don't think he's super blocky, which is the common criticism. And again, he has more size and better guns. This is very close though. I almost gave it to Derek despite me being a full-time hater. Now let's go to a slightly easier pose. You'll notice that Nick Walker is missing from the front lat spread, and that's because he's fourth forever and always. I don't even bother tracking down a photo for this one because he never hits it in his routines, and it's something that we all know. Now between the remaining 3, I could really have any one of them in first, even Samson really. I do like all of them in this picture. But I think Samson does have the weakest argument because again, his conditioning is just so subpar, and the stomach is a little too rounded for my tastes. This is a very good pose, they're all good, but this does put him in third. Leaving us with Hadi and Derek once more. Derek does look better in the shot than I remember. He does suffer with a couple of issues though. That chest still looks a little soft, the lighting helps him here but not enough. To be fair though, Hadi's chest is kind of flat looking. And then on the lats, Derek has the better lower tapering lats than Hadi, but the arms cover up a lot in this pose. He's a shorter guy with shorter arms, and it's clear that he was never supposed to have a back this big, because a lot of it is now getting obstructed. Hadi's lats are definitely wider, but again, they don't taper as much. But being wider through the shoulders and then the lats in and of itself is actually pretty important. And that is what really does it for Hadi. He has slightly worse lats, yes, but he doesn't have the minor issues that Derek has. Overall, I could actually give this one to Derek no problem, which is a shocker to me. But after looking at the different pictures of this pose and the footage, I can definitely see how he could win this one. Not for me though, I don't think he does quite enough, so Hadi will make it 2 for 2 here. But this time here in the side chest, we're talking about Nick first for a good reason. I see Nick as a pretty clear winner here. For one, he looks like a beast here. I can instantly pick him out of the lineup because every square inch of this pose is being maximized. So he wins the overall aspect, meaning when you look at everyone in the lineup, he looks to be the most muscular guy pound for pound. His side leg is also huge. He's not the sharpest here, but he has good detail and crazy size. I would say he's probably second best. Nick's arm and delt are also as good as always, and his pecs, although they take up less surface area compared to the other guys', are still very thick and very detailed. This is actually the easiest victory someone has had up until this point, which means a lot in this Olympia level lineup. Now as for runner-up, I'd usually have Samson here or maybe even first, but I don't really know what's up with him. His pecs are usually a lot fuller, so maybe it's a posing issue or something. His side leg has definitely been sharper, but I'm beating a dead horse with that point. Honestly, with this particular photo, I have to put him in fourth, with the caveat that he was probably better in real life, but I go by what I can see. Now between second and third, we have another battle between Derek and Hadi. Another close one too. But for now, I have Hadi for those very small details. Basically, Derek's side leg is the best up there. Hadi's might be deeply separated though, so he can limit Derek's margin in the thing he does the best, but Derek is still next level hard and dry up here. And then upstairs, they're pretty close sidewise in the chest, delt, and arm, but literally all that sold me on Hadi was the deeper separation between his arm and delt and the few extra details he has in the pecs. Overall, he's just a little more separated and hard up top. Now, someone could look at this pose and say that Derek should be second because he has the superior side leg detail, and I suppose that would be fine. That's basically what I'm doing for Hadi, but for the upper body. But I prefer how Hadi has better upper body details while also having good lower body details. Derek mainly only has it in the lower body. We are really splitting hairs here though, so let me just put Hadi in second and Derek in third, with the disclaimer of course that this is close, and move on. Now let's turn these guys around for the two back poses, and yeah, these are fairly straightforward. You gotta put Derek in first. I don't really think we need to talk about it either. He definitely makes this a three-man race for second. But that three-man race will easily be won by Nick Walker. Nick is the next best thing to Derek, and while he used to be better than he currently is, Nick is still doing enough to easily place second here. He has the best lower body in this shot easily. Derek may have the sharper glutes, but Nick has pretty conditioned glutes combined with some absolutely crazy hamstrings. His back is also pretty solid. He doesn't have that density of Hadi yet, but he has some more detail poking through and better lat insertions. He also takes the arms and delts too for what that's worth, and to be honest, in this lineup it's probably worth more because these guys are so close. All in all, he has great showings in both elements I want in this pose, including the best lower body. And that leaves us with Samson and Hadi, which is a surprisingly close battle. Hadi's rear double at the Olympia was kind of flat, to be honest. He doesn't have that insane amount of detail, but what he does have is a lot of density. Look at that mid back and even the lats. He makes Samson's back look a little thin, even though Samson has more detail. So the back is honestly very close, but I'm giving the lower body to Hadi. He has the better glutes, Samson's are both small and undefined here, and Hadi has the slightly better hamstrings. And then jumping back up, I would also give Hadi the edge in the arms and delts. Overall, I am giving the edge to Samson though, believe it or not. He just has the more detailed back. Take a look at them and really what else is there to say? Both of their lower bodies really aren't that good either, so Hadi's win there doesn't do as much as he'd probably hope. What really sold me though was watching the video footage of these two. Hadi's back just didn't carry a good level of detail here. A lot of density, sure, but not the detail. Now, both of the Arnold Classics this year, he definitely brought a different back, but at the 2023 Olympia, I am just not impressed with Hadi's back. I know a lot of you will disagree here, and it certainly doesn't feel right to say that Samson wins here, but it's good engagement regardless. We're going to the second back pose now, and we have some shakeups. Hadi catapults himself to first here. He's the widest, just plain and simple. His back looks like a couple of riot shields on both sides of his spine, and that density really helps here because no one is going to show great detail in this pose. Hadi is the only one here still looking thick because of all that density. Look how much thickness and density there is throughout the traps, down to the erectors, and just hanging off the back. The lower body certainly isn't the best again. His glutes aren't super defined, but he's solid down here, and he's solid on the hams as well. So Hadi does get some easy redemption here. Let's jump all the way down to fourth though, because Samson is easily taking the spot. This pose looks awkward and his poor conditioning is on full display. Not to mention his back doesn't even look wider than Nick or Derek's, and they're up to half a foot shorter. This leaves us with another close battle for the runner-up spot, and I can really go back and forth between these guys. Nick definitely takes the lower body over Derek. Again, Derek has those cheese grater glutes, but Nick has sharp and just nasty hams. But they trade off in the back in some aspects. Derek is wider than Nick at his peak, but Nick has the more pleasing taper to his lats, surprisingly. I don't like how Derek's lats come out a little bit further and then immediately pull back in. I like how Nick's back looks a little more filled in throughout, more like Hadi's. From top to bottom, all the space on those guys is filled in. But I think Derek's back is just too thick for Nick to overtake right now. Nick's back looks a little flimsy while Derek has equal width, so he has the better back altogether. He also has the better glutes and good enough hams to win. I do prefer Nick in this shot personally, to be honest. I like how his whole back has muscle over it and it doesn't end abruptly like Derek's, but as mentioned, Derek is wider at his peak, he's really thick overall, and does well everywhere else. This is a very close pose though, closer than you'd guess based on Derek's rear double. We're heading to our last side pose, and this is a straightforward one. Nick is winning this fairly easily. I said this in a previous comparison, but he manages to look pretty streamlined for how thick he manages to look at the same time. The midsection is pretty locked in and those abs are great. Second best midsection up here actually. His tricep is also the biggest, maybe not the most defined, but he definitely has enough size to be called the best here. The side leg is even gnarlier looking than the side chest, and he has a ton of size here still. He really has everything. No one else in this pose really does all of it, at least on the level of Nick. So he's getting a fairly easy first right here. And in second, I have to put Hadi. No one except for Nick has everything, but Hadi has most of what I want at least. The only thing Hadi is really missing is a bigger tricep. He has the smallest one up here. But other than that, he's really solid. He's not the biggest, but he definitely is the most detailed and the most streamlined. That midsection is clearly the best, the pecs are ripped as well, and the side leg showcases some deep separation too. What really saves him is the lack of flaws. Yeah, his tricep is small, but the back two guys are suffering with even greater problems, so Hadi coasts here easily. Now between Samson and Derek, this is just going to come down to what you hate more. Like I said, both have notable flaws. For Derek, it's the soggy look in both the chest and the lower stomach area, and I'm not a fan of either of those. But he does have some pros to his physique, mainly a more defined tricep compared to Samson and the sharpest side leg in this lineup. As for Samson's cons, he has a little bit of that messy stomach look too, with some lower stomach distension. He is also very unrefined. He has that thick skin type of look. But he does have a massive tricep. It is less separated than Derek's though. Same with the side leg. Samson is bigger, but Derek is more defined. This is close, but I settled on Samson oddly enough. I get it. His conditioning is not great and I've been knocking it for multiple poses. But I'm just not a fan of Derek's droopy pecs and the washed out midsection. Samson literally has the more defined abs. Overall, I think there is technically more to like about Derek, but there's certainly more to hate. That's why I went with Samson. Overall, I really don't care, I'll be honest. These aren't the best poses by far, but I just like Samson's more. In this next pose, I think we have the most surprising pose of the comparison, the abs and thighs. Let's start with Nick because this is the surprising part. Does he have the rounded stomach? Yes. Is he crunching down all the way on his abs? No, and I don't really think he was capable of doing that at the New York Pro. Are his legs good though? Yeah, they're pretty detailed. They just lack some sweep obviously, but he has this narrow stance up top, so that helps. But after all of these questions, I don't think Nick's getting first, but he's easily getting second. It's not because he's so good, it's because of the competition. Derek's abs and thighs is garbage, so he opts for a vacuum, which doesn't count to me. So Derek is at least disqualified from the top two spots. And even though Nick's traditional abs and thighs pose isn't that great anymore, he would still beat Derek head to head because Derek's pose is just that bad. As for Samson, his midsection looks just as bad as Nick's in some regards. He was letting his stomach go at times. We kind of saw that a bit in the last pose and we'll see it a bit in the next. But if they both have rounded stomachs, at least Nick has the abs over Samson. Samson may have slightly less bloating, but his abs are just way too shallow. The detail on the quads is as well. Nick beats him here. So Derek and Samson leave the door wide open for Nick Walker of all people to take the opportunity. And he did, and he's going to get second place. Now, as for Derek and Samson, take your pick really. To me, we're scraping the bottom of the barrel now, and at this point, Derek's vacuum does begin to count because it's at least something. Now, would Samson also beat Derek in the head-to-head using Derek's actual abs and thighs? Yes, he would. But if they both suck and are this bad, I just have to start looking for other things. And I know it may sound hypocritical, but at least Derek can do a vacuum. A pretty good one too. So overall, I am going to give this to Derek. Both guys are not good. They're both really in fifth if you want to be honest, but Derek has the better quads and can at least do a vacuum. And yeah, this does leave Hadi in first. He just gets it automatically if that wasn't clear, but I'm going to spare you the Hadi glazing for now and let's move on to our last pose. And finally, we've reached the most muscular, our last pose. This comes down to two tiers of competition, Hadi and Nick, and then Derek and Samson. Derek and Samson are definitely fighting to not be fourth, meaning they are in the lower tier of competition, so let's start with them. They both had the flaw of being very underwhelming when it comes to detail. Samson has a little more detail through the chest and shoulders, but Derek has more detail through the quads, and honestly the more detailed midsection in this pose. And speaking of the midsection, I am not a fan of Samson and how he looks a bit bloated. Overall, they're kind of struggling with the same things, so with that in mind, I do have to go with Derek. Now look, I am in no way, shape, or form a fan of Derek in this pose, but he's bigger in the delts, arms, the chest, and the quads. I'm not a fan of his doughy chest, but I'm not a fan of Samson's lack of quad detail nor his midsection. This is the most muscular, and although Derek's muscle has some maturing to do, he is pound for pound more muscular compared to Samson. He's the shorter guy and he has more mass per square inch. Could you argue that Samson is more impressive because he's taller? Sure. In fact, I think I've argued that before, but just not today. I have Derek in third because they're both suffering from lack of detail, but Derek just has more size. Now between Hadi and Nick, we have some great most musculars here. We're ending off with some of the best to do this particular pose in this current era. Nick wins the upper limbs, those arms and delts are just fantastic, but Hadi wins the chest for sure. There's more thickness there and clearly a huge advantage for him in terms of detail. Hadi also clearly wins the midsection like in the last pose, it's not even close. And finally in the legs, it's pretty close here actually, but I prefer Nick. His separation between the different areas of the quads is deeper, and since he hides his waist here, the lack of sweeps don't look that out of place. Hadi really isn't too far behind here though. And then from an overall perspective, both guys score a key win. Nick looks more muscular pound for pound when you examine both of them in totality, but Hadi blunts that to some extent because he has a clear advantage in width, which allows him to take up a lot of space on stage for a shorter guy. At the end of the day, I did try to give this one to Nick, I really did. He's massive and those arms and delts are just fantastic. I think on the face of it, he deserves to win this pose. But every time I look at this lineup, I just can't take my eyes off Hadi. He impresses me so much more. I think it has to do with all that detail and winning the major muscle groups of the torso like the chest and the abs. That overall conditioning is insane, it really makes him stick out even though he is slightly less filled out than Nick. Like I said, Nick probably should win this on paper, but with that insane quality more standout body parts, Hadi impresses me more than the mutant, and I have him taking the final pose but just narrowly. And that does it for the posing round of this comparison. Now it's time for the final scores. If it wasn't clear at the beginning, what I did was rank these guys 1 to 4 in each pose and gave them points based on their placing. If someone placed first, they got 1 point, 2 points for second, and so on. Meaning the lowest score actually wins here. Anyway, let's start with fourth. A distant fourth I may add, trailing third by 9 points. In fourth with 0 poses won and 29 points was Samson Dauda. For now, I'll just keep giving you the placings and I'll give you my final thoughts afterwards. Moving on, in third with 20 points and 1 pose won was actually our reigning Mr. Olympia, Derek Lunsford. Then taking the runner-up spot was Nick Walker with 18 points and 2 poses won. And yes, that of course means Hadi won this comparison with 13 points and 5 poses won. So overall, we had our 4th place trailing by a lot, our 1st place ahead by at least a noticeable amount, and a pretty tight 2-man race for that runner-up spot. Now, I said I wouldn't spoil a video where I used Nick's 2022 Olympia version for this type of video, but I changed my mind. This is your last spoiler warning, but I do think it's important to compare the scorecard to this one. Now, I swear I didn't look at that video before this comparison. In fact, I didn't watch it at all. I skimmed it to find the final scores, but here they are, shockingly similar to what we got today. Samson is still in last with 29 points, but Derek is still in third with just 1 more point than I gave him today. Nick still scored 18 points and got second, and Hadi ran a little further ahead in that video compared to today, scoring 11 points. Now overall, I don't think this paints the most accurate picture. That 2022 version of Nick was honestly just so good on every metric. He was complete, he had a freaky level of size, the waist wasn't that big, especially compared to what we got this year, and his conditioning was gnarly. And in that video, I believe I had him in second, which I was serious about. I would have had Hadi winning still, but Nick outconditioned and outmassed his way past the other 2 guys to get to that 2nd place. Samson was too soft and had gaps, and for Derek it's really the same thing. Nick gave Derek a real run for his money in the back poses and schooled Samson to his, and both of them had other gaps that Nick was able to take advantage of, and they couldn't really use their shape argument either. They still both had better shape than Nick, but that's all they had against Nick, and Nick outclassed them in many other areas. So I had that 2022 version of Nick placing second in the 2023 lineup, and I stand by that decision. But where would I have placed the 2024 New York Pro version of Nick? Well, I definitely disagree with both the previous scorecard and the scorecard we got today. For Hadi, I do think he was the most well-rounded. He has great conditioning and less weak points than everyone else. He was way too even across the board for these guys to handle. Derek lost shots badly, Samson did, and so did Nick. Hadi had 1 4th place finish out of all the poses, and even then, it wasn't that much of a loss. So out of these 4, I would still keep Hadi in first. And then for second, I would have Derek. This is the biggest departure from my previous video, but since Nick's waist got bigger, I wouldn't put him ahead of Derek. It's that simple. I don't prefer Derek, but Nick's waist is a bit too much for me. But I would place Nick ahead of Samson, even though Samson has much better shape than Nick as well. This is because Samson didn't do his homework like Derek did. Derek has good back poses and other good shots, and most importantly, he had conditioning in most areas. Samson was losing shots too much, like from the side and the back poses, and his conditioning was inexcusable. There's a reason he has earned the name Low Def Dauda down in my comment section. Derek and Nick were also separated by 2 points, so they can really go back and forth, but Samson was all the way back and forth with 9 points. That's a massive gap in a 4-way comparison. This Olympia version of Samson just doesn't do enough to defeat Nick. Some may disagree, but Nick was too complete and too conditioned. In my mind, there's actually more of an argument to be made for Nick beating Derek than Samson beating Nick. So that's my actual ranking of how I would rank these guys. Samson, Nick, Derek, Hadi. But is this what I'd expect from the judges? No, actually. Imagine that. But what do I expect to actually happen? Not my personal preference, but my actual prediction, so to speak. Well, I think Nick placed last out of these four, as crazy as that sounds. Samson beat Nick earlier that year at the Arnold Classic. Now, Samson was harder and more conditioned at that Arnold, and the lighting was more favorable, but that Nick from the 2023 Arnold was literally better than the 2024 New York Pro. And Nick still lost the Arnold with Samson getting a perfect score. And the way Nick was worse matters a lot. Shape mattered to the judges a lot at last year's Mr. Olympia, and it matters more and more. For reference, the judges only had Nick winning the New York Pro by 2 points. That was the closest margin it could be. It was razor thin against Martin Fitzwater. And Martin is great and all, but it's clear that this margin was because Nick's poor shape and his stomach was getting bigger. The judges were clearly warning him and setting up a precedent for future shows. Not to mention, in this Olympia lineup, Nick would be such an odd man out. His lack of shape would stick out like a sore thumb on stage. So I don't think Nick with his 2024 package would do anything against these top three. I do think he would still be Andrew and Brandon and place 4th, but that's about it. I would say Nick would be 4th, Samson in 3rd, Hadi in 2nd, and Derek in 1st. If you ask me purely what I think the judges would do. I would of course disagree though. As bad as Nick's shape is, he is still undeniable to a point. In my opinion, he wouldn't be Derek or Hadi, but I do think he does enough for 3rd. Well, that's going to do it for today's video. I'm very interested in what you guys have to say about this one, so I want you guys to do 2 things down in the comments. Leave your personal ranking of these 4 guys, then leave your ranking based on what you think the judges would do in this situation. And if you guys like these types of videos, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more. By the way, if you guys are looking for any high quality supplements and want to support the channel, head over to Arms Race Nutrition. Then at checkout, be sure to use code Project10 for 10% off your entire order. That's code Project10 at armsracenutrition.com. And finally, with all that said, I want to thank you guys for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.
No doubt I know I will go so far. Oh, I'm gonna have my name in the stars. Set my goal up high and do what I love. Gotta get that Lexia, gotta get that Lexia.